This video is just going to quickly go through some formulas that you've already seen. So it should be complete review. It's going to be kind of short just to kind of jog your memory and get you back into thinking about these formulas so that we can use them in class. So the first one is the distance formula. Right? The distance formula is how we figure out how long a line is or a side of a triangle whenever you're given 2 points. Okay, so usually your points end up looking like x1, y1, and then you got x2, y2. Okay, whatever those points may be, and then you just plug them into your formula where you have the distance equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, a couple things to keep in mind. Order of operations says that we start with parentheses, right? So you always subtract these, and then you square them. Okay, and then once you square them, then you add them together. And once you add the parentheses, then you take the square root. Okay, not everything has a nice pretty square root. Okay, numbers that you can take the square root of and get a pretty number, we call those perfect squares. Okay, so like for example, 25 is a perfect square because the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, not everything can be simplified like that. Sometimes if you have like the square root of 5, right, it's not a perfect square, so you have to leave it as a square root of 5. Okay, so you got to memorize this formula. It's the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, to go along with the distance formula, we have the midpoint formula. Okay, so that's going to tell us the point right in the middle of that line, right, or those 2 points when you're given those 2 points. Okay, so again, you're going to have that same type of setup where you're going to have x1 and y1 together, whatever that might be, and then x2 and y2, whatever the other coordinate is, and you plug them in, right? Whenever you're subtracting, order matters. Okay, so like for the distance formula, you're subtracting, so you got to keep them in order, keep them lined up. Adding, it doesn't matter. Okay, so really this is just saying it's the average of the x's, right? Because if you take the average of something, you add them all up and you divide it by how many there are. So I'm adding up my 2 x's and I'm dividing by 2. Okay, I'm adding up my 2 y's and I'm dividing by 2. Okay, remember with the midpoint, when you plug this in, you're going to get another coordinate point. Okay, another ordered pair. You're going to have an x value and a y value, and you got to write them in parentheses. Okay, the Pythagorean theorem. Right, that's how we're going to figure out sides of triangles and how long they are. In a specific kind of triangle, it's got to be a right triangle, which means there's one right angle. Okay, it only works if it's a right triangle. Okay, a couple things to remember. Okay, a squared plus b squared has to equal c squared. That c has to be the longest side. Okay, we call the longest side the hypotenuse. Okay, so c has to be the hypotenuse, and it has to be across from that right angle. Okay, a and b, it doesn't really matter what side you plug into where, as long as c is the longest one. Okay, so you got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, we also got to remember some area formulas. Okay, some area formulas. The common ones that we use a lot, and we will use a lot, we've got a rectangle. Okay, to find a rectangle, remember we talked about this, a rectangle has 4 right angles. Okay, this is a terrible attempt at a rectangle. But opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Right, so you denote congruency with dashes. Right, so opposite sides are the same and they're parallel. Okay, so to find the area of a rectangle, it's just length times width. Okay, length times width, where length can be the bottom, width can be the side, or vice versa. Okay, a square has the same exact formula. It's really length times width, but a square is a specific kind of rectangle where all 4 sides are the same. Right, so they would have 1 dash on all of them. Okay, so technically we'd be doing length times width, but as long as you know one side length, you know all 4 of them. So whatever your side length is, you just square it, because we would do length times width or side times side. So we have side square, but it's the exact same thing as a rectangle. Okay, the triangle, you have 1/2 base times height. Okay, so your base is whatever your bottom is. Now pay attention, height can't be a slanted side. Height has to come down and make a right angle with the base, always. Alright, you would never measure your height when you're leaning. Alright, you'd have to stand straight up. to figure out how tall it is. Okay? Parallelogram is similar to a rectangle. It's kind of like a slanted rectangle. Okay? A rectangle is actually a parallelogram. The only difference is it doesn't have to have right angles. It could have any angle here. Opposite sides are parallel, which then makes them congruent. Right? Now this is similar to a triangle. We got area is base times height. Your base is the bottom. Now your height has to make a right angle with your base. So your height could be there, or sometimes your height might be shown on the outside. Right? As long as it makes that right angle, you can use it. Alright, so all these are very similar with the length times width or base times height. And the last thing we're going to look at is volume. Alright, we're just going to look at the volume of a prism. The overall rule for finding the volume of a prism is that it's a capital B times the height of the prism. Now that capital B is different. We have to make it capital because that alone means area of the base, whatever your base is. You can have a triangular prism, you can have a rectangular prism, you can have a trapezoidal prism, you can have all different kinds of bases. Alright, so it's whatever the area of that base is times the height of your prism. So for example, if we were using a triangular prism, alright, this triangle is my base. Okay, so to find the area of this base, I would have to do my area formula 1/2 base times height. So find this and then multiply it by the height of the actual prism. Alright, now we're going to go a little specific and look at a rectangular prism because it's the same every time. It's just length times width times height. So if I have this rectangular prism, alright, and this is my base, okay, I would do the length, the width, just like I was finding the area, and then times it by the height of the whole prism, okay, every single time. And then a cylinder is a circular prism, okay, so it's got the same idea of this base times height, but if it's circular, the base is always a circle, and this is how we find the area of a circle, pi r squared. Okay, so whatever your cylinder is, okay, if this is our base, we find the area of it, pi r squared, and then we times it by the height of our cylinder. Alright, so just make sure you're comfortable with these formulas and you kind of got them in your head so you can memorize them so that we can use them in class and go through different examples that involve these.